Nos encontramos a una altura,
We are at an average height of 90 meters above sea level,
una zona
in an area that has quite intense summers that go from November, December to April or May,
noviembre, diciembre hasta el mes de abril o mayo, con un promedio de precipitación
with an average rainfall of between 1,000 and 1,200 millimeters per year. I am originally from the department of Huila, but for work reasons, I came to work here in the Caribbean region,
específicamente a la zona.
specifically in the area of the department of Cesar.
Por logística, el sitio de
Due to logistics, the place to live was, for the city of Barranquilla and in any case with a peasant vocation.
soy ingeniero civil, pero
I am a civil engineer, but before being a civil engineer I was a peasant and I am still a peasant and a lover of the countryside.
llegué aquí por el año 90 y
Once I arrived here in the year 93 to the Caribbean region, I always had in mind the purchase of a piece of land, to have a cattle farm,
porque pues con las condiciones
because with the conditions they present, there is no way to do agriculture, due to the scarcity of water resources. I started looking for the farm in 1999, I started looking for it in the dry season,
en la época seca y eso obedece a un consejo de mi padre.
and that obeys a piece of advice from my father who taught me that one should buy farms in the summer and houses in the winter. In winter the house to find out if it has a leak and in summer the farm to see how it behaves in the dry season, which is the true season,
Que es la verdadera época crítica para el sector.
critical for the agricultural sector, be it agriculture or livestock, since it is practically governed by the climate.
Por el clima.
So for that reason we started looking for it at that time.
Carla, busqué la finca,
I looked for the farm and we found it by chance. I walked through the entire department of Atlántico. It had to be something that was not too far from the city of Barranquilla,
que era mi ciudad de residencia,
which was my city of residence, because my work it did not allow me to have a farm in a more remote location.
entonces por cosas del destino,
So, due to fate, I came up to a hill that was on the edge of the road between the Corregimiento de Campeche de Baranoa
Campeche, corregimiento de Campeche, Baranoa y el municipio de Sabana Larga,
and the municipality of Sabana Larga. So we came up, I asked the Lord yes, he knew of someone who was selling a property of more or less the size that I was looking for and I asked him and then he answered me in his Santanderian words, I am selling this joke.
entonces entré, conocí la finca, una finca bastante abandonada,
So I went in and saw the farm. A rather abandoned farm, the man was already selling it due to health problems and, after a short negotiation I bought the property at the end of the year 99 beginning of the year 2000. From that moment we have the FI ever when I did business with the man there was a condition,
hubo una condición porque
because I noticed that there was no water on the farm
y había un señor
and there was a man with a donkey loaded with plastic talambuco collecting the water.
plástico recogiendo el agua. Entonces le pregunté al señor que
So
por
I
qué hacían
asked
eso
the
y
man
me
why they
explicó
did
que era
that
que
and he
no tenía
explained to
agua,
me
la
which
finca
was
no
that the
tenía
farm
agua
did
de
not
ninguna
have
especie.
water.
Entonces una de las condiciones que pusimos
It did not have water of any kind, so one of the conditions that we put in order to finish or liquidate the business was that I drilled a well, because without water, first of all this is a project that I have developed at a family level with my wife. I had to have water, she wanted her garden and to carry water on the donkey for the garden was totally unfeasible.
era totalmente inviable. Entonces acordé con el señor
So I agreed with the man that I would drill the well, if the well failed there was no business and that if the well was successful, then the farm business continued.
y efectivamente así lo hicimos y pues ya el resto de la historia
Indeed we did so, and the rest of the story is that the well did turn out well, because we have been exploiting the property for approximately 22 years.
comencé a notar, vi la finca que era
I began to notice on the farm that it is a fairly dry area, although the general comment was that this is because we are located in the center of the department of Atlántico,
y pues a pesar de ser la zona más lluviosa,
and despite being the most rainy because it is quite dry. So I understood that the only way or the most viable way to be able to develop a cattle activity here was through the water resource.
era mediante el recurso agua. Sin agua
Without water it is very difficult to develop it, so on the farm there I started with some small areas in aspersion, so we irrigated with sprinklers,
entonces regábamos con aspersión Y pues el propósito
And the purpose of the farm was that we were not going to have more than a certain number of animals, that we were not going to have more than 30 or 40, but the business became exciting to us. It grew and we saw that it was impossible to support everything in the animal load that we had, and so we grew towards here. So this area here is another property, which is 1 kilometer from the other farm. It is a 77 hectare
es un predio de 77 hectáreas.
property that is flatter than the other, but also with the same water limitations. That is, the problem grew everywhere. With more land I did not solve the problem of wanting to have more animals, so I also implemented some deep wells here. We made some deep wells and put to a large part of the farm. Some 11 hectares of the farm are irrigated by sprinklers.
11 hectáreas de la finca están regadas por aspersión. El tema del riego por aspersión
The issue of sprinkler irrigation, call it cannon, drip, or central pivot by anyone,
sistemas que requieren unos costos de funcionamiento
are systems that require very high operating costs and additionally quite high installation costs. Gravity irrigation have the great advantage that an initial investment is made and then the water walks on its own as you will see it, so the great attraction it has is to see microsprinkler paths traveled, of all, in which they are not viable due to the issue of costs.
no son viables por el tema de costos. El costo de mover un pivote central es bastante elevado.
The cost of moving a sprinkler is quite high and the intensity of the rain here or of the simulation of the rain that the canyon makes does not allow the earth to really maintain a humidity to that the production of grass occurs.
Mantenga una humedad para que se den la producción de pasto.
These grasses that you see exuberant remain that way. That is precisely why, because it is an irrigation by infiltration, and that infiltration, that water is used directly by the soil or, when you apply that water on the surface normally. Here there is a lot of wind and a lot of sun. There is a very high solar brightness that makes any water that you put on top of it, if it does not infiltrate, that water is carried away by the sun or it is carried away the wind. So the most important point to really highlight is the economy it represents, using gravity irrigation, which has a special condition and is that it has to have enough water. The sprinkler in quotes may use less water, but you have with water more frequently than in the long run. If you are going to see the water consumption, they can be very similar. Why? Because a meadow here irrigated by infiltration curves, that meadow can be irrigated every 15 days, while the sprinkler practically has to irrigate every day to maintain humidity. On the other hand, with irrigation by curves you do it, and depending on the paddocks and the type of soil, there are some that can withstand 15, 20 days and others that after 8 or 9 days have to be given, but in any case do not require the frequency required by sprinkler or microsprinkler irrigation.
Nos encontramos en el sitio.
We are in the place where the intake is located. It is a tube that is in the lower part of the dam, a 10-inch tube where the water is distributed in the 2 yellow tubes that can be seen in the background, one on the right and the other to the left, that the waters lead to 2 open channels to irrigate the lower part, without the need for pumping but only taking advantage of the force of gravity.
La fuerza de gravedad.
And we have here the solar system.
Tema solar que está compuesto por 56.
Which is made up of 56 solar panels of 520 watts each and a system, or a grid that consists of a brain that simultaneously manages the energy from the grid and the energy produced by the solar panels.
Una vez arranca el motor,
once the engine starts, it leads the water through this pipe that is here and takes it to the highest and furthest point of the property, and along its route there are different places where there is a valve depending on the place where we need to irrigate.
el sitio donde necesitemos regar.
So if I am going to irrigate in the farthest part, The water comes out at the highest point of the farm and the water starts from there to be returned through the infiltration curves and I start to irrigate.
Pero si es un potrero intermedio, pues no necesito.
But, if it is an intermediate paddock, I do not need to pump the water to the furthest point, but at that intermediate point we have a valve, we open that valve and from that point we begin to do it the irrigation for example. I am in a high part where the water comes out propelled by the motor. There as you can see the channels that go to the paddock where the bag of earth is going to irrigate are the changes that I make. I put aside where I want send the water and from there then the level curve is made for sprinkler irrigation. The topography is done, the highest part is sought for then later if it is taken by gravity. Which is where the motor needs to take it to the upper part and from there, in the topography, they will distribute it within the paddock.
La secuencia va amarrada a la rotación que hacemos con los animales.
The sequence is tied to the rotation that we do with the animals. We do grazing not at ultra high density, but as we are going to see, very small pastures are being made here. A 6,000 square meter pasture is enough for 100 cows for the day are in production, so depending on how the paddocks are being used, the man who manages the irrigation comes from behind wetting the paddocks. So there is a synchrony between the person who manages the cattle in the pasture and the person who irrigates. He knows which paddock to is vacated, paddock that is eaten, paddock that needs to be irrigated, so we go around and the paddocks with irrigation every 30 or every 28 days are going back to them, when in the season and those that do not have irrigation we pass once and around 90 days later we go through again because the weather conditions do not allow it. There are even some of these paddocks that are grazed already into the summer and can only be grazed once again the rains enter and the meadows have been recovered with the first downpours. It can take 100 days or 90 days when with irrigation we can be spending every 28 or 30 days depending on the paddock.
Aquí se riega.
Here it is irrigated every 12 days because it is cooler.
La parte de arriba de la entrada de la finca.
The upper part of the entrance to the farm is higher there, so there we water less time after 8 days because it is drier, it takes longer, it dries faster due to the temperature. Here it is cooler, we irrigate more than 12 to 15 days and I do the rotation, I take from there from the highest part later. I already have the sectors divided for irrigation for the changes, they agree where the rotation of the cattle goes, so soon the cattle come out of the pasture, I follow behind with the water sprinkling so that they come back and the food comes out for the other rotation.
La otra rotación.
The dam was not made that size on a whim, but we did a study of how much water we were going to need according to the population or the animal load that we have. Additionally, because we manage a breed of which we are going to talk about later that does not allow that one can unload the farm because I don't have any more farm. I have been making a great effort to multiply the breed so I cannot vacate the farm every time the dry season occurs because it is the only way to survive in this climate. Vacate the farm or lower the load and thus be able to maintain the load, then with the irrigation that we did, that is why the size of the irrigation of the dam to ensure that this water reaches us for 2 consecutive summers, that is to say, if at the time a phenomenon of the child enters the water would be enough for us to irrigate for 8 or 9 constant months. It is worth highlighting the texture of the soils in the region. As I told you, we are here in the Department of Atlantico. This is an area of sandy loam soils, which allows us to have much better water infiltration levels than when it has a clayey soil. When there is a clayey soil, the soils are complicated and the infiltration is not the same. The advantage of the sandy soil is that, the disadvantage that the sandy soil also offers is that it also increases the cost of water. The consumption of water be a little higher, but in this type of irrigation it is not required that you see that the water is getting wet and that all the soil is wet. You will see it. You can tell that the soil is wet because the plants are green.
No porque vea que está encharcado o porque hay.
Not because you see that it is flooded or because there is excess water on the surface. This is also an important factor when establishing an area with irrigation. Clayey soils or heavy soils are a little more difficult to manage. For a crop they would be easy, but for livestock it is a little more complicated. Why? Because it is the animals who step on and harvest the soil and they have to do it. We are talking about every 28 or 30 days. If there are 100 animals at 6,000 meters, well, 100 animals times 4, there are 400 legs that are treading that meadow every 30 days, so in a saturated clayey soil it is complicated. In this type of soil it is much more beneficial, and I say this because from experience, from everything we have after the cows were milked on the other farm, there was milking, and what we did
Y lo que hacíamos era con un tractor.
Was with a tractor to collect the grass with a combined harvester and bring the food.
Eso en costos comenzamos a mirar que era.
That in terms of costs we began to see that this was not profitable and had to end with that, and the only way to end it was to bring the cows here, to be milked here, and if it were the cows that harvested the grass themselves, then the machinery that was used to harvest grass was left behind, because now the same cows do it. We are going to see it later. How the same cows go through all the paddocks that are made for them of 5 or 6,000 square meters a day, and they are the ones that harvest the grass, as I told you in the past for convenience. Another farm is on the edge of the paved road. It was the first thing we civilized then, since milking was already over, and at that time, the costs increased substantially because the tractor driver, the machinery, the spare parts. Everything was already filed, and they are the same, the cows that harvest the grass and that go through the irrigation system, and the cows other than the tractor do not run over the meadow but rather massage it and generate an additional benefit on the
Y nos generan un beneficio adicional sobre el suelo. En cambio el tractor sí nos genera compactación.
soil, whereas the tractor does generate compaction. We here, as I told you, we have never used chemical fertilizers. The only time we did was an application in the upper part where the cows are with chicken manure, because I have a farm here in front and it made it easier for me to collect with the tractor, so the cows weren't there doing the work they have to do, and that is the important mission of the bovines, which they harvest themselves, and in exchange for that harvest they help us with that, they collect their own food and pay us with it. Manure and urine the prairies, and with that it is fertilizer more than enough for the recovery of the prairie. You can see it in the background. These are prairies that have never been fertilized in 20 years.
Son praderas que nunca en 20 años han sido abonadas. Venga, 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 niña, venga. Verdaderamente la ganadería o cambiamos la forma de producir.
Come on. Really, either we change the way we produce or we go out of business. We have to be clear that they have it between their eyebrows saying that we are the biggest polluters, but it results from the fact that in grazing, with these systems we are carbon capturers, because the biggest soils, the well-managed and grazed meadow with animals on top of it, are proven to last carbon. So when we have a system of these producing all the time because we mitigate the summer with irrigation, we will have a meadow that 365 days a year carbon is being captured, and today the systems not only have to be sustainable, because sustainable is to be in balance, what I take away is equal to what I return. We have to move from sustainability to the contribution of improving the quality of the planet, and the best way to do it is through carbon capture.
Del mejoramiento de la calidad del planeta, y una de la mejor forma de hacerlo es mediante la captura de carbono. ¿Cómo?
How? With the trees and with the soil, with these two factors, we are going to act as the actors most important in carbon sequestration in the world.